to release the findings of a research study that we have conducted into what some of our nation's best teachers have to say about standardized student end-of-year assessments that they have had the opportunity to examine. One thing that I learned as a result of this study that surprised me is that many of the teachers who served on these panels, and we had 2 panels with 23 teachers altogether, 11 on one panel and 12 on the other, is that for many of the teachers, this was the first time that they had actually gotten to see a full-length assessment, and it was an eye-opening experience for them. We had 23 teachers, State and National Teachers of the Year, as well as finalists for State Teacher of the Year, serving on these panels, and they each devoted about 20 hours in real time, spending time with these tests, taking the tests, examining and discussing the tests, and analyzing together what they saw. And the report is their findings. So it's what these teachers had to say about these assessments. Every study has limitations. You're typically in a research study limited by factors like time, resources, access. We were extremely fortunate in this case to have access to 6 assessments. 4 states contributed their assessments to this study: New Hampshire, New Jersey, Delaware, and Illinois. And both of the consortia contributed their assessments, PARCC and Smarter Balanced. And we're deeply grateful to those organizations and institutions for allowing us to have access to their assessments. Some of the limitations that we faced in this study, some of the difficult decisions that we had to make, included things like not every teacher could examine both content areas. So each teacher examined one content area, either ELA or math, and the teachers were chosen for their expertise in those areas. We were not able to engage in the computer adaptive testing component of Smarter Balanced. We simply weren't able to do that, given the confines of what we were able to accomplish. And so instead of doing the computer adaptive version of the assessment, all of the teachers looked at the same version of the assessment. If you understand, and I'm sure you all do, computer adaptive testing, each student would have a different experience as items are being filtered through as they're taking a test. In this case, that did not happen. Every teacher saw the same Smarter Balanced assessment at the 60th percentile. Another limitation was we could not look at every grade level of the assessment. We only looked at 5th grade. And another limitation is that with the PARCC assessment, we could only look at the end of year assessment, the EOI. We could not look and examine fully the PBA. This, and I want to be very clear about this doesn't mean that the teachers didn't have the opportunity to see the PBA, they did, but we did not have the time or capacity to take the PBAs into consideration in the data analysis. So these were some of the limitations that we functioned under. That said, we spent over 20 hours with 3 assessments each panel. It was a very, very in-depth look at each of these 3 assessments. And what these teachers have to say about these assessments is important, and I believe that it's compelling. There are 5 critical findings from this study. And in each of these findings, we are going to ask one of the teachers who participated in the study panels to talk in some detail about the findings, but to just give you a quick overview of what they are. The teachers' voices told us in our data analysis that the consortia assessments better reflect the range of reading and mathematics that we would expect our students to master at the 5th grade level. The teachers' voices also told us that these assessments better reflect the cognitive complexity that we would expect students to be challenged with and experience at the 5th grade level. The teachers' findings also told us that these assessments are better aligned to what they actually do in the classroom on a daily basis. And they told us that these assessments, while they are rigorous and they are challenging, are accessible and grade level appropriate at the 5th grade level. These are important findings. This is important information from some of our best teachers. Before we get started and hear from the teachers, I would like to offer a few thank yous. My mother always taught me that you start with your thank yous. So in addition to thanking the institutions and organizations that gave us access to their assessments, and as someone who worked in assessment development at Educational Testing Service and then at Pearson for over 13 years, I know how difficult it is to allow your assessment out. And we kept these assessments in a very confidential and very safe environment, even going so far as to rent the computers that we utilized to allow the teachers to look at them so that no one was walking away with information on their own device. So in addition to thanking those organizations and institutions, I would like to thank our partners in this study. NNSTOY would not have been able to do this study. We are not able to do any research study without a science partner. And our science partner in this study is Clouder Consulting, and Dr. Catherine McClellan and Dr. Jillian Joe are both here. They are the principal authors on this report. You're going to hear from Catherine in a moment. Jillian, could you stand up?
Sure.
Thank you. We would also like to thank the teachers who participated in this study. As I said, we did this study over 2 weekends. So teachers gave up their weekends, they gave up their family time at the end of August when they're getting ready to start school, or they've already started school. And they did spend 20 hours in real time with these assessments. We had some fun along the way. We had some great meals and we had some great discussion, but 20 hours of taking and discussing and analyzing assessments is a very demanding process. So I want to thank all of the teachers, those who are here and those who are not, for that. What I'd like to ask Catherine to do now is to come up and share a little bit of information about how we approached the study. So just the study methodology, but the primary thing that we want to do today is to give you the opportunity to hear from the teachers. So my remarks, Catherine's, Chris's, and Scott's are going to be brief, and the teachers are going to speak at length. So Catherine?
Thank you. My mother too told me to start with thank you, so I would like to thank Catherine and all the teachers for the opportunity to work with them. It is a great honor and privilege to work with some of the best teachers in the country. I was briefly a high school teacher before I became a psychometrician, so I know just how hard that job is. I consider myself a novice teacher at best. It is an honor and a privilege to get to work with groups like this. I am a psychometrician. I didn't get to work on this study, and I will go very briefly over the methodology. The details are contained in the study. If you have questions, I will be here and be happy to answer questions afterwards. What we did was we designed a study to get at the opinions of some of the best teachers in the country about some standardized tests, both former and current, that are being given to students at the end of the year, primarily to see if the teachers felt like we were on the right trajectory. Were we in fact improving the situation in terms of the assessments? So we looked at the opportunity to get former state assessments and the current state assessments and make a direct comparison, something that had not been done with the actual teacher voice, which is what we felt was missing from the conversation. So we decided we thought was a fairly straightforward study. We did a webinar to introduce the teachers to web depth knowledge, which is a framework that's pretty commonly used in education to look at cognitive demand of test items. We wanted to do that mostly to get the teachers on the same page, so they had a common framework and a common voice and an ability to discuss these with common language. The point is not to make them experts in WebDOK, but just to get them on the same page with the way to discuss these in the same terms. So they spent a day working through these tests, doing alignment and ratings of WebDOK. So they had a webinar in advance and they had training on site to get them consistent with each other. Like I said, the point of this is not to make them experts in WebDOK, but to get them consistent so that they are rating in terms that are consistent with each other. And then the second day, we did the thing that is the main focus of the study and is the primary data that's presented in the report. We created a survey that had them take a step back from the items and look at the test more holistically. So you see a lot of questions in the survey, from the survey that are presented in the report that talk about what do you see in the assessment as a whole and compare the assessments as a whole to each other. What do you think about them in terms of what they ask of the students and how they reflect what you do in your classroom. So you see comparisons where they're asked to agree or disagree with statements, and they're asked to talk about the amount of items and the types of items that are presented on the assessments in terms of their opinions. And that's what you see reflected in the report. As I said, The teachers are gonna talk about what they thought, what they saw, and what you see reflected in the report. The methodology is presented in the report in more detail. All the items are in the back, all the data are in the back. So if you have questions about details or exactly how we executed it or the survey we created, I'd be happy to answer them after the presentation's over. But I think the people you want to hear from are sitting at the table and aren't me. So I'm gonna let them talk and let Catherine introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Catherine. Before we turn to the teachers, I would like to continue thanking our second partner, Ed Council. Without Ed Council, this study would not have happened, and we had a wonderful family of colleagues at Ed Council working with us in this project. You're going to hear from Scott Palmer directly, so I'm not going to introduce him at this point, but I would like you to meet Terry Taylor, Nick Spiva, and Bethany Little. Could you please each stand? Each of these individuals was critically important to this project, offered sage advice and wisdom, and helped to guide the process of gaining access to the assessments themselves. So the study would not have happened without Ed Council. And finally, I'd like to thank the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors who provided the funding for the study. A study can't happen without funding. And there isn't anyone here from Rockefeller, but I want to acknowledge that they provided the funding to make this happen. So at this point, I'd like to move into the findings by introducing you to some incredible teachers. And the first teacher that I would like you to meet is Barbara LaSaracina. Barbara is the 2001 New Jersey State Teacher of the Year. Barbara is a 5th and 6th grade math teacher. She's an alternate route teacher. She comes from the biomedical field into teaching. And in addition to teaching her own classes, Barbara is also the department chair for mathematics in her school and district. Barbara is an incredible woman, incredible energy and passion for teaching and learning. She is also a brand new grandmother as of several days ago. So she is experiencing, she has lots of beautiful pictures, but she is experiencing something new in her life that has made learning, teaching, assessment even more important for her now that she has a grandchild. So Barbara is going to address our first finding, and she's going to focus on the fact that we found that the Consortia Assessments better reflect the range of ELA and mathematics that we would expect in our classrooms for our students. So Barbara, can you please go ahead?
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today. And it was a little difficult for me to tear myself away from my first grandchild, but I'm very happy to be part of what I feel is a very powerful study. I come to this profession not in the standard way. I did work in the private sector for over a decade in the biomedical tech field. And it was actually that career that brought me to teaching. What I noticed in my tenure in the private sector was that a lot of the people that we were hiring right out of college lacked what I would consider to be the basic mathematical and science knowledge that they would need to do their job successfully. Over the course of a few years, we had to spend so much time and money in remediation to get them up to the point where they could be valuable to us in the field, that it started to concern me, like, how are we educating these people? What were we missing? Because these were supposedly high quality people. However, there were basic misconceptions that they came with and basic skills that I felt they should have mastered before they left our educational system in the United States. And I could have just spent my time complaining about it like lots of people were doing when we were sitting around eating lunch, but I decided I could do something more. So I left and I became a teacher. This was about the time my own children were starting school. And I also noticed that when I would ask them some of the things that they were learning in math and science, and I think my favorite science story from my daughter was, I said, well, like, what goes on in science? She said, oh, that's an afternoon subject. And that was all I did. Like, okay. So what I noticed in this study, which I feel is so powerful, because we were able to have a side-by-side look at different assessments. And that is so powerful when you can have one test and then the other test. Last night I was using it as kind of a before and after picture. Because if you look at one of these diet ads, I mean, if we only see the skinny person and we can't compare it to the fat person, we don't really know how good the skinny person looks. So I needed to see both tests and really take my time to observe all of these assessments question by question And having 24 years in the classroom, and I actually asked that I could teach for the period of the first few years, math for grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now, people thought that was crazy, because teachers like to get comfortable in a position. I wanted to change every 2 years, because I wanted to see where we were going, where we come from, and where we have to go. Which also, I think, lends a different perspective to you in the classroom. I know where these kids come from, and I know where they have to go. And that allows me to move them along in what I feel is the proper trajectory for their mathematical education. The new consortia of tests provides our students with the ability to do multi-level critical thinking, which was clearly missing from the older assessments. Our world has changed dramatically. We can no longer educate our students in a world that now has the calculator and the internet. Skills that were valued 10, 15, 25 years ago are not valuable and marketable today. So we do a grave disservice to our students if we still teach them in that way and we assess them in that way. Now, it would seem for the non-educator that this would be a very simple process. We are given a curriculum, we teach it to our students, they learn it, we test them. Sound simple? Okay. They show us what they know. But it's so much more complex than that, because teachers never had a voice in what these assessments look like. And what information are we really looking for from these assessments? I will tell you quite honestly that when I was changing careers, I was not a fan of assessment. It really looked to me like we were taking a lot of time out of those very precious moments that we have those students and so much information and things that we want to teach them. Was it worth it? Because my question always was, what are we doing with this after we do it? I mean, the parent gets a letter and it gives you all kinds of graphs and things that half of them don't understand. Everybody in town would be calling me because I live in the town I teach it. By the way, big mistake. I can't even go shopping. Everyone grabs you. What does this mean? What does this mean? So my question again was, what are we doing with this? The PARCC information comes back also in a form that people can really understand. And it gives you a breadth and depth of knowledge that for me as an educator, I can clearly see areas of strength and weakness in our teaching. Parents can clearly see strengths and weaknesses in their own students. This gives us so much more information than we had before. And that's another discussion that I don't think a lot of us were having. We need as much educational knowledge as possible so that each and every student rises to their highest level. Now keep in mind, that level is different for every student. You can't say that the bar has to be here for everyone. We're looking for growth in each and every student so that they reach their greatest potential. I got to meet some people out here earlier when Catherine said we could meet some people that we hadn't met before, and one of the conversations we had was about professional development. And my district is doing an excellent job right now on professional development for teachers so that we can learn to take this Common Core and this new testing and teach the students what I consider to be one of the most critical things on both the ELA and now the math test, close reading. We really have dropped the ball on close reading for many years. We want that our children to love reading, and I don't want you to think that I don't think that's important, I do. But we were having them read fiction all the time. You know, all these great science fiction stories and romantic stories and, you know, sci-fi, it was all great. But again, as I said last night, how many jobs are there where you're reading books like that and you're just talking about them? Very few. So reading technical information, close reading, nonfiction was basically absent completely from our curriculum. That was a real problem. So now when they're reading nonfiction material on the test, and especially in the math format, which is now heavily content heavy with reading word problems, this is a bridge now we have to gap, because we have to train the teachers on how to break these problems down for students, because we're like a microwave society. They want to scan it and be done. They're used to texting. When you tell them to close read like a whole word, and God forbid it's a sentence or more, they don't want to do it. But they're seeing now that if they don't, their grades are suffering. So this testing has changed the way that teachers teach and students learn. And what I think I learned from this study, which is the most compelling thing to me, was the way my students reacted from the prior test to what I saw last year. And my students are very, I'm all out there with how I feel about everything, and they become the same way. Last year, my students had told me after they took the PARCC that the prior assessments were so easy, and I could see it. They were sitting back in their chairs, and they were looking, and they're bubbling in, and if there were 17 minutes for the test, they were done in 5. Pencils are down. They could go, check your work. They go, it was so easy. Like, we checked it 10 times already. When I gave them the PARCC test, we had the hunched shoulders, the furrowed brows. They're reading, they're looking, they're clicking on their computers to find more information. No one finished early. No one. And they said that they felt highly challenged by the test. Isn't that what we want for our students? So again, the big takeaway for me was we are going absolutely in the right direction here. Is any assessment going to be perfect? No. But we need to start somewhere, and this is a great start. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I'd like you now to meet Jamela Pose. Jamela is the 2014 Georgia State Teacher of the Year. Jamela is a special education and ELA teacher. But this year, she has taken on a new role as she pursues her doctoral degree. So Jamela is going to school, studying, but she is also working with pre-service teachers to help them grow into highly effective educators. And she is also coaching in a local school district. So Jamela is both learning and teaching adults. Jamela is going to address point 2 of our findings, and point 2 focuses on the cognitive complexity of the test items on the tests that we examined. Jamela?
Thank you. So anytime Catherine Bassett sends you an email, you know it's going to be good. So when I opened the email that asked if I would be willing to examine a few state tests, including the PARCC exam, I was like, is that even a real question? Absolutely. And I did it for many reasons. One, I truly believe in education equity for all students. And also because Georgia had pulled out of the PARCC exam just a few months before we really started implementing the Common Core and things like that. When I got a chance to look at the exam, I thought about a student that I had named Rachel. And Rachel was one of the most brilliant writers that I had ever met. I've ever had the privilege to teach. She won awards for her nonfiction writing, for writing plays, regionally, statewide, nationally. She was amazing. But when it came to taking that state test, Rachel had so much anxiety. She would look at the test and she would say, the answer that I would choose is not there. I don't think like this. An exam like the PARCC gives Rachel an opportunity to think outside of the general multiple choice thinking that we often see on most state exams. It gives her a chance to show the complexity of her thinking. So yes, she has some things that she'll be able to show you, that she can recall basic information, but then it also gives her an opportunity to show that strategic, critical thinking that she so often does, and that she does so well. You see, Rachel had a very different view of the world. She had just been put into foster care. So the things that most of her classmates saw, she could see beyond. She saw it very differently. And a test like the PARCC would allow her to show her thinking in a different way. So I'm really excited that I had a chance to examine the PARCC and think about the tests that we have in Georgia. We have recently released our state exam, and the results are a better picture of what Georgia has to offer and where we need to grow. But I think that we can learn a whole lot from exams like the PARCC.
Thank you, Jamila. I'd now like you to meet Angie Miller. Angie is the New Hampshire State Teacher of the Year 2011. Angie was an ELA teacher, but she transitioned into the best job in the entire school, being the school library media specialist. I'm a little biased here, not much. Angie is also one of the most gifted writers that I've ever had the privilege to meet. When Angie writes, she's telling you incredible stories. She's also an adventurer. I've never met anybody who more loves a new challenge, and particularly a new physical challenge, than Angie. So this summer, she served as a National Geographic Fellow and traveled with a group of other fellows to the Arctic to explore that region of the world. Angie is going to address our finding number 3. And finding number 3 focuses on the fact that these new assessments are better aligned with the strong instructional practices that we as great teachers expect to implement in our classrooms on a daily basis. Angie?
Good morning. So when I got the email, well, actually, I didn't get the email from Catherine. She grabbed me at a conference and said she had to talk to me about something very serious. And I thought, oh, what have I done wrong now? But I actually came into it a little bit cynical because I'm not a fan of testing. And so this was a really good process for me because I was very familiar with the tests that we were examining, but was not as familiar with Smarter Balanced. And so it was a very rewarding process, and I walked away feeling much more comfortable about giving this test to my students. I felt as though it brought the focus back to great teaching, right? And that's what that finding ultimately says, is that we feel like these tests help great teaching when you put it into plain speak. And that is the most critical thing in my profession. So one of the things that I found was that the previous tests, there were a lot of hunting and pecking skills, right? In one of the tests, I didn't even read the passages. I read the questions and I found the words and I went back in and I got them all right. I knew they were all right. And so I think that teachers have been teaching for many years in these high stakes arenas how to hunt and peck. They've been teaching how to take tests and not how to think. And in the Smarter Balanced test, it's about how do you think, as Jamila was saying. How do you analyze? And that's because they are so closely aligned with the Common Core standards. And in literacy and the Common Core standards, they're bringing in best practices that we as classroom teachers have known about for 50 years, like writing across the curriculum and integrated research and vocabulary and context. Those are great practices. And that is what the testing is asking our students to do. And so what does that look like in our classrooms? That means currently I am teaching The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks in biology class. It means I'm teaching the Chocolate War in sociology class. It means I'm running an integrated Syria unit with my 9th graders because real world learning is going to prepare them to sit down and take this test. It means that yesterday morning when this 10th grader, he's an 11th grader, Chad, came into the library with the principal and said, I'm failing English again. And the principal said he needs something outside of the box. He's not being successful in English class. And so we sat down and we started the early plannings of what is English class going to look like for you if you're working with me one-on-one. And I said, tell me what you like, Chad. What interests you? And this is a very salt of the earth, Carhartt, hiking boots, New Hampshire farm boy. And he said, I'm really fascinated by what's happening with ISIS. I really love learning about the world wars. I love football. I love cars. And I love traveling, and I've never traveled anywhere outside of New Hampshire. And I want to learn more about that. And so we can design an English class that is going to make this kid successful, and he is still going to be able to sit down with a Smarter Balanced test and do well. And so I think that's what our third finding speaks to.
Thank you, Angie. I'd now like you to meet Joshua Parker. Joshua, in my estimation, is a Renaissance man. There's nothing that this man doesn't know, and there's nothing that this man can't do. He is a scholar.
No pressure.
He is a coach. He is a mentor. He is a sage. Josh is teaching in the District of Columbia Public Schools. He is teaching ELA, and he is going to address finding number 4, which speaks to the new assessments being better positioned to be relevant to a wide range of performers. And in our findings, particularly moderate and high performers. So Josh?
Thank you. When that Josh that you're talking about enters the room, I will greet him. But until then, I'm just glad to be here. What a great panel we have with great teachers, Catherine, and I see lots of friends here over the years. I do want to start off by saying that it's important to understand that as teachers, we have a lot of weight on the things that we say, not just in front of the children, but when you become a teacher of the year, you bear the burden and the weight of speaking for the profession, whether you want to or not. And so when we make these findings and say the things that we're saying, we are including the perspectives of many colleagues that we have. And so, in even looking at the test, we're looking at it with them in mind and our children in mind. And so we don't ever take these things lightly, and we don't recommend things based on just what we want to say. We think about all the children that are impacted by these decisions. We think about all of our colleagues whenever we step in the room. That's very, very important for me to say right off the top. What I also bring into this is my experience as an African American male. And that is a different experience in the classroom. And so I've been teaching for over 10 years, but I also have experience as a student that I think is important as well to testing. So when I was in the second grade, my mom, who is a teacher, my dad also a teacher, my sister a teacher, right? She taught me very well how to read at an early age, which as an African American male put me at a distance with a lot of my friends actually. And so stereotypes were thrown to the side and I was teased quite a bit. But the thing that was interesting in classrooms is that whenever I would get a test, I'd be finished extremely quickly. And so in kindergarten, that's okay. In first grade, that's okay. But then after you do it for a couple of years, you tend to want to be mischievous. And so that's what my experience was, because the tests were so easy for me that I'll be finished, and the work was easy because the work was aligned to the test. And so many, many times, it was very difficult for me to really maintain focus in the classroom. And I'm already a boy, so maintain focus sometimes is hard for us. All right, so that added to my desire just to play around, not gonna lie, right? And so my parents, and we had a meeting, of course, we had a meeting about Josh, what's going on with him, what's wrong with him, right? And so they decided to skip me a grade. And so went from 3rd to 5th grade. And the same problem existed. So that's a concern for me because I'm not unique to that, right? There are boys, there are girls, there are, just like Rachel, who you talked about, who the work is too easy. I think there was a report recently that talked about the work not being demanding from a student perspective. And so when I went to the park, I said, if I had this in 3rd grade, I would have stayed in 3rd grade most likely, because it was challenging. And so I believe in the Emerson quote that says the key to respecting students, or the key to education, is respecting the pupil. And what better respect can you give a kid than giving him work or giving her work that will really challenge them? And that's really key. And so let me fast forward to the other side of the coin. I decided to enter to the classroom. One of the reasons why I wanted to enter the classroom was because I wanted to get what I never received consistently, which was a male role model in language arts. And so that's why I went into the classroom. So when I went to the classroom, for teachers, the test is everything. And a good test will get you good data to help students continue to progress. So the test that I would give, even at the state level, would be tests that give me a lot of information about low performers and not a lot about middle or high performers. And so I would then spend all my time narrowing my attention to the low performers, but what about the middles? What about the highs? What about the Joshes in the classroom, right? And so the test I'd have to do something different, something more rigorous to find out where they were, to differentiate that and give them more. These tests, I believe, do that already. And so if we can separate and we can understand certainly where the low performers are, but where the middle to high are, I think there is so much more potential for us to actually graduate students that are even more enriched than when they came. So as an instructional coach at Paul Lawrence Dunbar Senior High School, just 10 minutes away from here, one of the things that I've been seeing in that school, it's a gorgeous school, is that teachers are used to, from years of these tests, teaching almost to the middle and low, and not necessarily to the high and the mid, and this is changing that, right? So the question is, what are you doing to differentiate not just below, but above? And that changes instruction. It puts more onus on the teacher. It puts more onus on the instruction as a facilitation. So I'll end with this. There's a lot of discussion about education right now, and I actually think that's a good thing. Some of it is contentious, some of it's partisan. That's just par for the course. But I like that attention is still on this because it's needed, right? So the idea, though, is how can we get, and I love that someone said this on this panel, how can we get students to become their best selves at every level? And you cannot have equity if you don't know how everybody is doing and are willing to address it. And so there is a push towards privatization, a push towards technology, and I appreciate that. But tests like this show us that teachers still matter. They will always matter because they are the ones that can make critical decisions across the spectrum of student capacity. And I think that's a very important finding.
Thank you, Josh. What I said. I'd now like you to meet Christy Martorelli. Christy is the Arizona State Teacher of the Year 2012. Christy is an ELA teacher in Arizona, and she's taken on a new role where she's working with other teachers to help them become better ELA teachers. Christy has also taken a very active role in the state of Arizona in terms of supporting Common Core state standards. Christy is an amazing policy advocate. She has no fear. Christy will meet with a governor, with legislators, with policy wonks. She doesn't care. She knows what she believes and she'll speak her mind. So Christy was on the panel that examined Smarter Balanced and 2 state tests, and she's going to address our finding number 5. And our finding number 5 says, yes, we do believe that these new tests are more rigorous and more challenging, but at the same time, they're also grade level appropriate, and even more so than our prior state tests. Christy?
Thank you, Catherine. So Josh and I are the same year, and you know when you're working with an amazing educator because you walk away every time you hear them speak, and you're reminded of a great quote. And one of the pieces of this work that I saw is that it aligned with me as an educator is the idea that one of the greatest gifts that we can have is to work hard at work worth doing, right? You've heard that quote. But how often do we really think about that for our kids in our classrooms? And my son is Josh. He's a 3rd grader, and he talked to me about, we had these 2nd grade benchmarks in our district. He's a student in the district in which I teach. And he said, Mom, my teacher was on me. I had such a bad day. I looked at the questions and they were so easy. I knew I could finish them in just a second. So I played around and I colored on my booklet and I got in trouble. And at the end, he had almost a perfect score. And so he said, Mom, I had a great day today. This is the beginning of this year when we're trying to match our benchmarks to look like PARCC and Smarter Balanced. And he said, I barely finished. And I worked the whole time, I swear I worked the whole time. And he did, because it's a very different type of thinking for him. But my concern as a reading interventionist, I knew I'd be able to get my son and kiddos like Josh where he needed to be. I would be able to push them, and I knew I had teachers that were already looking at how do they differentiate those classroom experiences for them. But I was really worried what this state assessment would look like for kids who came to me, reading intervention students who were significantly below grade level, and how that would look for them. And so actually when the standards came out originally, I was a big critic and a cynic about them. I wanted to know how they were going to take my ELA kids who were already struggling significantly behind, and really I was worried that they were going to punish their teachers in the process of these assessments because they wouldn't be able to access them. And in the process of looking at the standards, it actually made me realize that we needed to do something different. And this really illustrated by a student that I had that was in my interventions classroom. His name was Rubio, and he came to me as a 1st grader, really missing all of the foundational skills that he needed for reading. He didn't know his letter sounds, he couldn't put them together in a word, and couldn't really even tell you how many sounds there were in a word. But he had other gifts. He had this beautiful smile that he would walk into my classroom every day. And he also had a mama who would be on him every day to do everything he needed to do, and would always call me every week and ask for additional work or an extra book that she could practice. What book could she get at the library for him to help him? And so you can probably guess that by the time he exited the 4th grade and moved into the Bilger building on campus, that he was doing a lot better. He was closer to grade level and he was able to access his content in all of his areas. But I got a phone call from a Reveals mama when he was in high school. And it was around parent-teacher conference time, and I was really worried that it was going to be bad news. And so I called her back thinking of who do I know at the high school that I can support, that I can connect her with. And what she said was not what I was expecting. She said, I just had a conference with a Rubio's little brother, and he's doing phenomenal. He's at the top of his class, and I just wanted to thank you. Now, I have to be honest that I didn't work with the Rubio's little brother. He never came to me. He was an intervention student. But if you know teachers, we'll take credit whenever and wherever we can get it. So I thought about saying, oh yes, thank you, we've been working so hard. But I figured that would probably not go very far. So I said, well, no, I'm so glad to hear that, but really, I haven't been working with him. And she said, no, I know, but I wanted to thank you because a Rubio's little brother, you know, years later is in the same place a Rubio was when he needed to come to you for help. And I never told you this before, but by the time a Rubio got to that class, I couldn't read his homework anymore. And so you helped him and you helped me. When I asked for extra books, I was reading them. You taught me not only how to help a Rubio, but how to help myself. And now when my youngest son is in the same position as my oldest son, he's at the top of his class. And so thank you for helping me be a better mom and a better reader. And then she also told me that a Rubio had just done great on his state assessment, which our previous assessment. He had met the standards and she was so excited that he was gonna be able to exit high school and go to college. So teacher moment of the year, right? Like, yes, this is amazing. And then 6 months later, I got another phone call, and it was from his mom, and she asked if I would talk to him because he was dropping out of college. Not the phone call you want to get. And what I realized is what I kind of knew when I talked to her before is that he really wasn't prepared for the program that he wanted to go into. And when he got to the college, he had to take remedial classes, and it was really, really hard for him because he had gone through high school with this great smile and this great work ethic, and his teachers loved him just like I did. And we had dumbed down our assessments so low in our state that he met, and we told his mom, I looked at his mom and said, you are ready to go to college. Your child is prepared, and he wasn't. And what a fraud we should have all felt like. And so, is this assessment hard for low-level kids? Yes, it is, but it should be. If they're not meeting grade level expectations, it should be hard for them. They should get a low score, and I should talk to his mom and be honest about what he needs to be successful when he leaves. And it should be appropriate for Josh. And for my son, they shouldn't have 4th grade material because I know that 5th grade material, the reason it was easy for Josh is because it was recall. It wasn't deep understanding of the content. And so I bet when he got to high school, as awesome as he is as a Renaissance man, there were pieces that he needed to dig more deeply into because he didn't know them. He skipped grade levels of content, right? So these assessments are much better. They are hard for our low-level learners, but they also help us as teachers have a better picture and a better conversation starter for parents about what level of understanding that their students really do have for language arts and math content, and then we can move forward to make sure that we create plans for Josh and for Rubio and for Lucas to make sure that we have a clear picture of where they need to go outside of our school. So thank you, Catherine, for the opportunity to look at them.
Thank you, Christy. So we have 2 discussants who are going to respond to the report, Christopher Minnick from the Council of Chief State School Officers and Scott Palmer from Ed Council. But before we do that, I wanted to give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have of these teachers. So this is your time. If there's anything that you would like to ask them, please feel free. Any questions for the teachers? Comments? Thoughts? Laurie?
Hi, I'm Laurie Calvert from the National Network of StateTeachers. My question is, we hear a lot of pushback about that the new tests seem that they're coming from a particular point of view, that they're supporting one worldview over another. Did you find any of that in the test when you're looking at consortia assessments?
I'll jump in. I'm from Arizona. I let that sit out there for a second. That's all. Push back. Let's let's just talk about that for a little bit. We were also a PARCC state that left a few weeks before we gave the assessment. There is a lot of that. I have that conversation often. I can tell you that it's very difficult to see that opinion if you look at the assessments that we've looked at. They're basic factual passages and nonfiction passages. I think they don't lean towards one way or the other. They're passages about animal environments and what were some of the other passages that we read? As language arts, there were significant passages, and actually one of the things that I valued as an ELA teacher is the fact that there were non-fiction passages, and there were also fiction passages that came together as text sets to allow the students to create that information. And one of the pieces that is powerful about the assessments that's different is, as you heard Jamela talk about, is that there's not just a multiple choice question on every one. Students have the opportunity to create their understanding in a written form and to back it with evidence that they pulled out of the pieces. So that's very different than choosing A, B, C, or D that's a correct answer. And so I think it's actually on the contrary, we're asking students for the first time not to give us a right answer, but to give us an answer that they can prove is right. And that's very different. So I think my answer to parents that are concerned about that is that actually in asking your child for the first time to really be able to back their thinking and giving me evidence, I'm not telling them what the right answer is. And so they're able to shape that understanding based on what they've learned in their own way.
Thank you. Thanks, Laurie, for the question. I thought I saw a hand. Yes. And can you tell us who you are and where you're from?
Hi, Beth Foley, National Education Association. Thank you all. We have our work cut out for us. Hello, gentlemen. One thing growing up and bringing my boys up as student athletes, you spend the first 5 years of your life learning to read. You spend the rest of your life reading to learn. And so one thing that was incorporated into, I'm from Loudoun County, Virginia, and one thing that the sports program incorporated, coaches, going to the coaches, that was cool. You had great relationships with coaches, but then if you had to go off to the other room to get extra help for reading or for math or whatever, that was kind of always standoffish. And one thing they put in place in this particular high school was reading coaches. And just the name reading coaches was so much more effective to get kids in the room. And then both my boys were mentors to student athletes that had English language challenges and whatnot. And so with the Common Core standards, and then you're reading, you can read the English book, the literacy book, but then can you read the chemistry passage? Can you read the biology? Can you read the actual Western Civ? Has that played into your roles, and do you support that as a way to keep the Common Core in focus or in perspective?
I can address that as a librarian. So part of my job is literacy integration. And so, we are reading in all content. And, I think content area teachers are a little bit stressed about the Common Core because they have not been trained to be reading or writing teachers. And that's scary for them. And I think there is a lack of professional development that has been there to help them for that. So as a librarian, whenever my teachers are saying, hey, I want to do more reading or I want to do more writing, I'm working with them. So actually next week, I'm going down to the 7th grade science teacher's room, and I'm sitting in and watching the content for a few days, and then I'm introducing some writing stuff that she can incorporate. And we do that with reading as well. With Henrietta Lacks, I ran the first few conversations and activities about the literature and the responses, and then the biology teacher stepped up and is taking it.
So it's definitely on the radar.
Yeah, and so I think it's a great place for librarians to step in. Yeah.
I would say I'm an instructional coach, and I've also coached JV boys basketball, and there's a lot of similarities there in terms of the idea of just getting someone to do something. The idea of this Common Core in other subjects, how it has played out in my role so far is that in social studies and in science, their questions are very much at the recall level. And so my work has been to get them to go to those deeper levels of knowledge and really help them help the students, right? And so also in math is that's another place. I have another person on my caseload right now, and we're focusing on how can they articulate their answers in ways that actually pulls all of that computation together in language that is really clear. And so the English piece has been much more, at least in my estimation, much more nuanced in how we push science and social studies and math to incorporate that reading in there. But they feel relieved when we give them help because their focus is, well, if they can't read and they can't write, the math teacher told me this, they're having difficulty just expressing what their thinking is. And so they're starting to see that this idea that everybody's a reading teacher is important, but everybody is a thinking teacher, which is we use reading and writing to help people think through things. And I think that that nuance that the Common Core has allowed us to start having those conversations across content is very critical, especially the secondary level from 6 to 12.
Yes, sir.
Tony Shivers with the United Way. Could some of you provide some insight on the conversation that you're having with teachers or with parents? I mean, in light of the lower test scores that are coming out, what those conversations are, how are you explaining, the progress that's being made?
I'd be happy to take that because I live in a community where an A- is viewed as an F, so you can imagine what these scores look like. We have suffered as a nation from grade inflation to the point where getting A's is what everybody was expecting to get. We do a great disservice to our students when we do that, because as they move into the higher fields of education and into the workforce, they find out that they're really not A students. We had to do many workshops with our parents to have them understand how difficult these tests were and what these test bands were going to look like, and their students were not going to be getting these very high scores. I mean, I shared with our dinner group last night that when we were giving the prior assessments, I would have a vast majority of my students scoring perfect scores, which was a 300. I basically thought I was the greatest teacher in the whole world. I thought, oh my God, I'm like amazing. This is like so terrific. Not ever taking into account that these tests were so easy, that's why they were doing so well. Of course, we knew the scores were going to be lower and significantly lower. We understood that, but that's not a bad thing. I don't view that as a bad thing. I view that as a realistic score that we now have to work within those parameters, because all our students are not A students. That not means they're not bright people, that they don't have multiple gifts, but the fact that all our students, basically in my school district, and we have now totally realigned that too in terms of what our honor roll looked like. I mean, I don't think it was an honor to be on the honor roll because like 93% of our students were on the honor roll. I figured it was more of an honor not to be on the honor roll because you were the one who was like, really the special one. It was absurd. And we were, they look at teachers and they think that, that we think that stuff is great. We didn't. We were pushing for them to reevaluate the whole system of our grading because it was just getting so out of hand. Now the issue with that is, and I was just talking to a Harvard researcher this week who's doing a study on grading, and that paper will be coming out shortly. When our higher institutions try to deflate grades, and my daughter got caught up in this. When my daughter was at Princeton, and she was there from 2002 to 2006, Shirley Tillman, who was the then president, decided that she was going to stop this grade inflation. And her theory was that in each class, only 10% of the students would be allowed to get A's. Now, I wasn't a big fan of that. She and I had many discussions about that, but she did that for a 4-year period. What happened was, when all of those students graduated, they were vastly disserviced in trying to get into graduate schools because the other Ivies did not fall in line. So that fell by the wayside. So this can't be something that a few schools start. This has to be a national movement, that we move towards giving true reflective grades of a student's ability level. We are having those conversations, but they have to be on a more national level, absolutely.
And the other conversations that I have with parents is that this is a little bit exciting. I try to get them not to look at that number. That final number is not what we need to look at, but it's the actual indicators. So here it is that your student, they're having trouble with specifically how to construct sentences or how to construct compound sentences or complex sentences. So we're looking at that indicator and how do we help your students specifically in that area. So I try to get them to look outside of that number because it can be limiting. It can make you feel like you're not enough. But if you look at the more qualitative feedback that you're getting, the informational feedback that you're getting, it can help parents to see that, okay, my child still has opportunities to grow. And that's what it is, it's an opportunity to get better at whatever you're not as strong as you'd like to be at.
Thanks, Jamila. In the back.
I'm Arnold Fahey with Public Advocacy for Kids, and I want to thank all of you for the testimonial and being a former teacher as well as a former administrator. I think the discussion about higher level thinking is long overdue, and I agree with the testimonials. Now, that being said, I want to segue. There is a movement of parents opting out of Common Core, and there are a number of states, Colorado being one, New York being another, where the parents aren't quite convinced with either the Common Core or PARCC or Smarter Balanced has the science behind it, both in terms of reliability and validity. How are you involving, and of course ESEA is being reauthorized, and there is a discussion about whether parents can voluntarily opt out of Common Core without the school district suffering any kind of consequences. Talk about how you are involving parents. By the way, these are not just Prius parents. We're looking at an Ed League report that said we've got an equal number of more disadvantaged parents along with more advantaged parents who are joining the movement. And it's more than just a small movement. Talk about how you involve parents and how you convince parents that this is really good for their kids when they're telling me that they just don't want anything to be harmful to the kids or anything to happen to them.
So, thank you for that question. For the purpose of the study, I focus on the quality of the assessments, and some of the answer I think can best be answered by our discussants to my right. What I will say, you're welcome. Thanks, Rick.
Spotlight.
So what I will say though, there was in Ed Week, NNSTOY was allowed to guest blog for Rick Hess, and one of the things that I wrote in my blog was that partnerships are one of the key things that we needed to do. And one of the things around partnerships is we needed to really define and operationalize for parents in plain language what these assessments mean and what they're doing. And at the same time, we don't need to make assessments tied to some of the punitive actions that have been taken with some children, also with some teachers. And so I think the idea of defining what these assessments are, and Jamila just really had a great point, which is talking about the indicators and the points for growth, is a way to help with that. The policy side of it, like again I said, it's not the scope of this study, but I think you bring up a really important point, which is we need to involve parents and the community in ways by defining the language for them so that they understand at all levels that this is something that can help us help your children. And so if you opt out of PARCC, you're opting into something else. So, I mean, that's the conversation that I would have as a teacher, but the larger idea is how do we as a government, as a media, as a community of educators, define that language so that parents can really understand what it is they're doing or not doing so they can help our children. And that's kind of my take on it. I don't know if anybody wanted to add on to that.
Megan?
Hi, I'm Megan Sabo. I'm the 2015 Delaware Teacher of the Year. I was just curious, as a classroom teacher, in Delaware, half of our math and ELA teachers' evaluation rating and effectiveness rating at the end of the year is tied in with our previous test scores, the DCAS. Now, last year was our first year with Smarter, so they waived that, and this year they're also, DOE said that they're also waiving it again. I was just curious, from your perspective, how comfortable you would feel with your evaluation rating being tied into your students' test scores with these new tests.
Mine is.
Oh, it is already, okay.
So in New Jersey, a piece of our puzzle for our end of the year assessment as educators is how our students perform on the tests. And that's gotten a lot of negative press also, and certainly teachers feel that there's so many things that cannot be measured about what a teacher does.
I'm okay with it, if that's, I'm not gonna tell you that it bothers me. I do what I do every day. I mean, I'm not different if somebody comes in my room or there's a group of people watching me, and, what I do is what I do. However, I think for a lot of teachers, this being reduced now to a number, we define ourselves in life so many times by numbers. I think especially for women, we feel like you're defined by your age, you're defined by your weight, you're defined by how much money you make. And now there's just another thing, we're giving teachers another number now. Okay, so this is what you are, you're a 2, you're a 3, you're a 4. If you gave us the same students every year, of course you could say that that was valuable. You get the same product every year and we expect you to turn out, this particular car or this particular, dress, but you don't get the same students every year. So it is contentious. That would be, I would say, one of the most contentious issues that we have right now are these test scores going to be used to punish teachers whose students do not perform as well, and reward teachers who perhaps have the higher level students in their classes, or parents that spend a lot of time with their students. So it's a very contentious issue right now, but in New Jersey, we are evaluating our teachers, and remember, it's only math and language arts teachers, so that becomes another issue. If you're in a non-tested subject, you're scot-free, that's not part of your evaluation, so that's become very divisive in our district, which I think is a sad sidebar to this. To me, it's just sad.
Just to add to that really quickly, I think to your point of a lot of times we mix up what our concerns are around education with things that aren't really that particular topic. And so I think as we look at these assessments, our nature of our study was to see if we're on the right path with assessment. So I will tell you that while we work out teacher evaluation, we figure out the right way to really evaluate what we do in the classroom every day. Until we are able to move that way, the way that we hope we are, this is definitely a better assessment to measure what I'm doing in the classroom. It's much better aligned with what I hope I'm teaching every day. And I can tell you that because of the broken system of teacher evaluation in my state and state school labels, that we had moved to a profession that taught to a test and that did exactly what Angie talked about with hunting and pecking for information. We no longer did what we thought was best for kids or for education in the classroom. We did what would get our kids an A and that would get them to meet the standards according to our assessment, not what the standard demanded of them. And so this is much better aligned with the kind of instructional practices that I would want in my son's classroom and that what I would want measuring me. How that actually works out in that puzzle of teacher evaluation, I think we need a lot more teachers around the table to have that conversation. But this is definitely, as the report says, the right trajectory. We're definitely on a better path. And until we can work it out, this is definitely heading in the right directions.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question for this round, but you will have other opportunities to ask questions. Yes.
Hi, I'm Susan Sclafani and just completed a Common Core digital curriculum development project. What I hear and what we talked about in a few minutes was the issue of professional development. You are superb teachers. You can hear that in all of your comments. And I'm pleased to hear that some of you are working as coaches and helping other teachers. What are the teachers who are struggling with Common Core, struggling most with, and are your systems providing the support that they need to get to this higher level of teaching?
So I'll briefly talk about this. Thank you for that question. They're struggling with nuance. They're struggling with how to, and I talked about this with the science teacher that I'm working with. She has recall questions, but I asked her, okay, after they've done this, what are they synthesizing? What is the relevance piece here? How are you asking them to cite from text, but also add their own original thinking to it? And so, and this, I want to add on to the previous question with teacher evaluation and assessments. So this is a sea change, these assessments, okay? And you're working with curriculum. And so because of that, it now forces all of the states in the consortium to now change their curriculum. And when you change curriculum, then you have to change your practice. So there is this entire train behind the test, and I don't think that it's wise to start with the front of the train until the rest of them have been aligned. And so I don't think teachers want accountability. I think that is the thing that's missing from this conversation. When we get into unions and things of that nature, we want accountability. We're not shirking it. What we're saying is, make sure the accountability is instructionally sensitive. It's based on what we're teaching, which is aligned to the best test for our children, right? And so, because of that now, we're having training. And I can tell you that it's a process. It's a process this is changing the way that we look at even regular instruction. When I finished this panel, and I was floored by how important it was for students to really deeply understand every single text on that test. I mean, they literally had to understand it deeply, not just passingly, not just I know this paragraph. They had to understand how the parts fit the whole, it was really deep, right? And that changed. So there's going to be some years behind the practice to catch up with these assessments. And in that intervening time, I think it is wise for us to continue the discussion as to what professional development is appropriate. I think more coaches are necessary, to be honest with you. But also, let's pause on this tying it to evaluations until the rest of the train's been built, right? And I think that's a key point.
And teacher prep programs. I also think that we have to be getting the word out to teacher preparation programs also. That's critical. That's a critical piece in my state, that they're not still preparing the teachers in the ways of the old assessments and just the way of the old teaching. And it's very simple. Josh coaches for language arts, I coach for math. And I think teachers can be overwhelmed because there's so much media about this, and there's a lot of negative media about it. But you could take a very simple lesson. I used an example last night, and I used it in some of my math classes, where on a prior test, they would give you like 4 fractions, and you would select the one that was in simplest form, A, B, C, or D. All right, and that's a basic recall question. On a PARCC test, that question would look different. It would say 3/5 is a fraction in simplest form. Explain in mathematical language why that fraction is in simplest form. Okay, that's a whole different level of thinking now. And as I try to tell teachers, I'm not telling you to throw away all your lessons. I'm not. I'm telling you to ask the question in a different way. So we can make this very palatable for teachers and train them to do this quite easily. And they're relaxing now because we're trying to go in with examples of how you can take the lesson that you have and just turn your assessments around to look a little bit different so your students are thinking a little bit more deeply and learn the language to express what they're doing. So I don't think it's as hard, as daunting as we think, but as Josh said, we still have a lot of work to do, and we're behind the trend. We got a lot of work to do.
In terms of professional development, I worked in 2 schools in the past 5 years, so as implementation has been occurring, I've seen 2 different models. And in one model, it was the administration purchased a curriculum, a boxed curriculum that had a shiny sticker on it, put it in the teacher's hands, and said, you need to be on this page on this date. Those teachers are very frustrated. In the school I'm in now, the conversation was, meet with your teams, meet cross-curricularly. What are you doing that's awesome? What are you doing that's great? And where are your concerns? And the time was gifted to the teachers to dig in and construct and study and read and talk and fail and learn from those failures and reflect and have good, meaningful conversations with our administrators. And so, unfortunately, I think the school I'm in right now is the minority. I think a lot of districts have responded by saying, here's the box. And so those teachers are feeling like they don't have the professional development necessarily. And I think the teachers that I work with right now, because they have been at the table as teachers, they feel empowered with the Common Core. And so it's another reminder that when teachers are part of the solution, they do great things.
Thank you for those questions, and thank you, panel, for your insightful and thoughtful comments. I'd like to turn now to our 2 discussants. Scott Palmer is a partner here at Ed Council. I believe he's one of the founding partners here at Ed Council. And I've known Scott, I think, for a decade at this point. But I've gotten to know Scott a whole lot better over the past 6 months. I'm a Southern girl. I was born in Savannah, Georgia, but I was raised in New Jersey. And Scott and I haven't always agreed on everything, and he has helped me find my inner Jersey girl. He's been a wonderful partner, and I've loved our conversations, those where we agree and those where we disagree. and I absolutely love the outcome of our collaboration. So Scott, I would invite you to share some thoughts.
Sure. Well, first of all, this has been a great discussion, and probably the best thing I could do is not say a word and let the teachers keep talking and folks keep asking great questions. But I'll say just a couple of things. One is thank you to Catherine and Gilliam and the teachers, both those here and those who aren't here but participated, for taking the time to do this. Angie, you were talking at an earlier conversation about how hard it is to sit for 20 hours across 3 assessments, right? So really appreciate you leaning in on this, and I think we're all the better from it, and sort of really getting a sense from you authentically, honestly, about where we're headed and how we move forward. I think it's clear to everyone in the room that this is a really critical moment of transition in our education systems, and we have this overdue but essential ideal of all kids really achieving at college and career-ready levels and mastering that full array of knowledge and skills. This is not just an economic or a national imperative. It's an ethical and moral imperative. It's an imperative for each and every child, which I think you heard very well articulated. But achieving it is going to take some fundamental shifts. And at the deepest level, it's going to take big shifts in teaching and learning, which is why I think it's so great to hear from educators directly about what we're seeing. You know, the focus of this study and this conversation is really about assessment. You hear already, though, how deeply integrated these issues are. We've talked about assessment, we've talked about standards, we've talked about Common Core, we've talked about educator evaluation, we've talked about accountability, professional learning. These are all deeply integrated. But, you know, some of the things I take away that I think are so powerful from this are, number one, there's a group of educators telling you here, let's not make any mistake, assessments matter. They matter to teaching and learning. They matter to setting expectations. They matter to equity and policy decisions. But the assessments have to be high quality. So the question is, what direction are we moving in as we look at these consortia assessments? And what I really appreciate, Catherine, is the notion that this is an authentic question, right? Here's the evidence. Here's a protocol. Let's see where we end up. And I think what was particularly powerful to me is, despite a number of understandable limitations in what was found, you know, small sample size, can't do adaptive, we didn't look fully at performance-based components. My expectation is, had all of that been understood, would have been even more impressive in terms of the outcomes. But regardless of those, what you see across the participants and across the forms of evidence is clear, consistent directionality, that this is moving in the right direction. And I think there's a number of important manifestations of that it better measures the full range of knowledge and skills, that it better reflects the full range of learners. Josh spoke very well to that. But I'll tell you, the one that resonated with me most fully, especially given your expertise, your effectiveness, the recognition you've received, is that it better aligns with the kind of great teaching that you hope to see in your classrooms and the classrooms that you work with and the classrooms across the nation. Because if we don't do that, then we're just fooling ourselves, right? Nothing else seems to matter. So I really thank you for taking the time. I think there's a lot here to unpack and then, of course, to build on. You're never done, and certainly this isn't done. But, you know, we get caught up in a lot of politics around these issues. If we opened these blinds, you would see a building that stands for that proposition right behind it. It's really important to, frankly, beginning with educators, to be clear about the facts first, to be clear about the judgment first, and then see if we can put all that politics somehow in some perspective. And I think you've helped us do that, so thank you.
And thank you, Scott. Chris Minnick, as the Executive Director of the Council of Chief State School Officers, has been a very strong supporter and good friend to the National Network of StateTeachers of the Year, a 3-year-old organization, as well as a strong supporter to the movement for high and rigorous standards and assessments that measure them. And we have invited Chris today to come and share some of his thoughts about what we found in our report. Chris?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, all of you. Yeah, I get the honor of representing the state superintendents across the country, and they all agree on everything. So In many ways, I was telling Scott when we were sitting here listening to this, like we really shouldn't be up here. I mean, this is about what they were, what they're saying. So I just want to highlight a couple things I heard. So the first is that we're moving towards better tests, and that's actually driving some change in the classrooms across the country. I think that's lost in a lot of the political discussions about whether we're picking PARCC or Smarter Balanced or ACT or whatever in the state. I hope the states that have decided to move to a different test hear this clearly, that while there are good options out there for you, even if you're not going to pick one of those options, you better pick a better test, because it drives change in the classrooms across the country. So I think the most important thing is the change in expectations for students. You heard Josh talk about, actually you heard everybody talk about that we really are now at the point where we've got to hold the line. We got to figure out ways to make sure that we work the politics, that we figure out how to make it okay to give some of these assessments, but at the same time we have to support the teachers in making that change in their classroom. And I think those are the things that I heard very clearly here. A couple other points. First one is, I think everybody sort of talked about the idea of too much testing going on in the country. President within the last 2 weeks has brought that up. I think the nice part about this study is that they look at quality first. And I don't think as a parent that I would mind my kid sitting for a test if I had 5 teachers telling me that it's really driving what I want them to do in the end. So, the question about the opt-out movement. The opt-out movement, I think, is driven by the fact that parents just don't know what these tests are doing. They think, and actually in some places, the tests are at a low level. So why would my kid want to spend time taking a low level assessment? And I think that's a fair thing for parents to sort of state. So we, as leaders of the education systems across the country, we put out in March of 2014 our high quality assessment principles. And we talked about, our chief stood behind them as what we wanted in our state assessments, our local assessments. And it does require a bit more time to give some of these better assessments. But what we need to do is eliminate these low-level, low-quality assessments and focus on the assessments that actually deliver value for teachers. And it's pretty clear. I mean, these are great teachers, but I've heard these comments from other teachers as well. And I think what I think is the most important thing about this is quality actually matters in this debate much more than sort of the amount of time we're spending on testing. And then the final thing I'd say is this is a new baseline year. They already talked about teacher evaluation. I think there's a lot of truth into what's being said up here. We have states in all different positions on teacher evaluation. What I would say is, as a whole, I think our members, our leaders as state chiefs, I think as a whole understand that how a student's doing in the classroom should matter to how teachers are doing. And I think there's nobody that would back away from that. I think a push too quickly to making these things matter too much in the conversation will be a challenge. So, and you're seeing that in some places. So I think if we can have a smart conversation about how we don't totally back away from the idea that these tests matter, it should matter to teachers, should matter to kids. But at the same time, we don't place too much of a weight on it as we're moving into these new systems. And I think there's a balance there that we can get to. So I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you all, the 5 of you. I've heard from you last night, I heard from you this morning. I just want to take you guys with me and give all my speeches. And I don't know, I can stand behind you. So anyway, thank you, Catherine, for a moment. I'm happy to take any questions too. Thanks.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions that they would like to ask of Chris or Scott? Or is there anyone who didn't get to ask a teacher a question? Kathy, I think your hand was raised before.
Yeah, I was, well, first, thanks for the report. I'm going to follow Catherine's thanking everybody to start with. One thing that, Barbara, you said about grade inflation, and it made me think about the purpose of these tests. I was thinking about, did you, when you were looking at them, I haven't had a chance to read the whole report, when you were looking at the tests, did you evaluate them on how they align to this concept of mastery learning? I know a lot of schools aren't going there yet, but that's where people want to go. And I'm thinking about these tests in alignment with grades, and grades really don't reflect mastery learning. So in relation to what you looked at with these tests, what's your takeaway with regards to how they would inform you in terms of mastery of the concepts that students are supposed to be mastering?
I think one of the most significant parts of this research study was that we were first allowed to, so that everybody, as Catherine says, was on the same page, look at the DOK, Dr. Webb's model. And again, taking each question, we were asked to take each question and level it from a DOK 1 to a DOK 4. So that's where you get into this, level of, what, and I actually remember I asked the question of, I think Catherine McLeod, I think she'll remember, because I asked her what we look for in an ideal test in terms of balance. Because you would want a balanced assessment, because at the point we're at now, in my state, my recommendation was to phase this in, K1, 2, let those kids move up, and of course, they shook their head yes, but that's not what they did. Because as we said, you have the test at the front of the train, but there's so much that has to be, again, behind that. So for these first years, yes, we look at each question and actually took each question and graded it as a 1, 2, 3, or 4, so that we could see how the tests were balanced in terms of mastery. Certain questions would be, if you look at a DOK 1 or a DOK 2, those would be your more simple questions that don't require a lot of skill knowledge. Well, they actually are, let me just say, they're basic skill knowledge. Your DOK 3 and DOK 4 are where there's a multi-layered problem with questions that have parts A, B, C, and D, where you're doing more critical thinking. Of course, they're going to take more time, but what I love about those, both in the math and in the English language arts, is the amount of writing that the students can do, because there can be more than one correct answer. So for the students that our other teachers talked about, the Rachels and the Joshes, who maybe don't think in exactly the same way as what is, 365 divided by 15, they get to say, well, I took this problem to mean this, and this is how I went through a process to get to this answer. So they're typing and doing all. So ideally, would that be where we would want all our questions to be? Yes. But are we at that point yet? No. So I think the test is going to morph and evolve as our professional development gets better, as our teachers are coached to teach in a new and different way. The trajectory that we're on is such an excellent one, and again, I think it's long overdue. I so applaud Catherine and this group for taking this on and seeing the necessity for us to do it. So taking each question and monitoring its mastery value, I think has helped all of us to look at our tests in a new way.
Hi, I'm Jeff Nelhaus. I'm Chief of Assessment with PARCC Inc. So I just want to say, just literally hundreds of local teachers and state educators who built this test over the last 5 years. I wish they were here to hear you. You did a great job, and it's really heartening to hear your comments, because it validates a lot of hard work that went into producing the assessments. So thank you very much. And I also want to say for everyone, you're talking about the test questions. You can actually see the test questions. We have released a form of every test. They're on our website. So the test is very transparent, and that's one of the ideas of this assessment system, is to help make sure people understand what the standards are about. If you read a standard and to see it manifest in the test, adds meaning to the standard. So we're really happy to hear your comments about that. I know Jackie King is here from Smarter Balanced. I'm sure she would share my remarks. And I want to say, not only are the questions released, but answers are released. So when we ask a student to write an essay, actually go on the website and see what an essay looked like that got a high mark on it. So as a teacher, you can actually understand what the standard is by looking at student work. So that's another important part of the program. So thank you very much again for the hard work that you did and the comments that you made. Thank you.
I would ditto my colleague Jeff. It's been just thrilling to hear your comments, and it does. We had about 5,000 educators involved in building the Smarter Balanced system, and you're validating all their hard work and effort of so many volunteers, just blood, sweat, and tears to produce these tests over such a short time trajectory. So it's thrilling, and I will pass along your comments. It's a real shot in the arm to people who have been doing all this good work and then having to read newspaper stories like we've all been reading. So I cannot thank you and thank NNSTOY enough
for this. We're really trying to work on in Smarter Balanced the link between the end of year tests and the interim and formative elements of assessment. So our interim assessments are available to teachers. That's kind of our item release in a way. Teachers in the Smarter Balanced states have access to those. So look forward to working with you in the future as we try in our next iteration of work to really build a tighter connection between the summative, interim, and formative elements of assessment. So look forward to that partnership.
Thank you. I'd like to ask each of our panelists to do a lightning round and give us one closing thought about this experience. And Scott, I'm going to start at the end with you.
I guess what I'll take from it is the notion that while I talked about the shift in college and career readiness as being a major driver, and one that is going to happen over time, it's not a light switch. I actually think the bigger shift underlying it is this pivot from more of a compliance regime and mindset at all levels to one that's really focused on innovation, evaluation, continuous improvement as the driver. If we could make that shift to real learning systems at all levels, I imagine in the practice of a great educator, but all the way up to policy, I think we'll begin to be where we are. And so what I really, again, appreciate is that this study both shows us some important findings about the directionality of our efforts, but also points to some things that we can continue to do, and points to the fact that you're never done, a point that came out a lot at dinner last night. So let's keep moving.
Three quotes from the teachers. So the first one is these tests force students to think. You cannot have equity without a focus on all levels of students. And the test is hard for kids, and it should be. Those are three things that really stood out to me in the panel. And again, I mean, if you're doing stuff in around these assessments, talk to these teachers, figure out how you get them engaged. So I work with Catherine on that. And the folks from PARCC and Smarter Balanced, I wish every one of your leadership team, I wish everybody could hear this, especially with what you've been through. I mean, this is a good day for you guys. So thanks.
Josh?
I'd echo that. Thank you for your comments, the PARCC and Smarter Balanced. I guess my thinking is let's continue to honor teachers. Let's continue to celebrate them, not just Teachers of the Year, but all teachers, which is our mindset sitting up here. We take their feelings and thoughts into this room all the time. But let's continue to honor teachers and let them lead the change through, because they're the ones that are the best equipped to build the test. They're the ones that are best equipped to evaluate it, and they certainly are the best ones equipped to teach to it. And so that's my thing. Let's continue to honor teachers.
Okay, I'm going to get a little more existential, which I usually don't do, actually. When I was thinking about this, when I was on the plane yesterday, I was thinking about so many things that are going on in our world right now. And I am a very patriotic person, I am. And I love this country. When I became a teacher, I realized that it would be an important job. But what I think I realize now, working with these wonderful people, and all of you who are involved in trying to make an assessment that will so help our students to learn to think and to be college and career ready, is that really, with everything that goes on and all the political discussions that you hear, if we don't get the education piece right, we're not going to get anything right. So all that America is, or can ever hope to be, is going to depend on what happens in our nation's classrooms.
Janella?
My greatest wish for all of my students is to not be able to think inside the box, not to be able to think outside the box, to have no box at all, but be able to build your own box. Because that is where innovation and creativity and imagination, that's where it's born. And when my students have an opportunity to do that, they believe in themselves, they become more confident, they become the citizens that we want them to be. And anything that supports that is something that I support, and I know that all teachers would support. Build your own box, I think.
I think for me the biggest piece is how we use these assessments is to communicate with our families and our kids. And what we've been doing previously is giving this information. And so for me, you've heard it multiple times from all of the people on the panel, is how important our relationships and our partnerships are, not just with our families, but with our community colleges, with our universities, with our businesses. You see teachers that came from a business that was wondering what was happening in our classrooms and what the heck were we doing, because these kids were coming out unprepared. And so I think our number one job, as Josh said, is to be the educator speaking about what's happening in our classrooms and to make sure that we are gatekeepers for what is shared and what's communicated about what's happening in classrooms. And assessment is a way that we do that in our country. And so making sure that we're a part of that conversation and that the communication that's coming outside of an assessment is authentic and real and valuable and useful for parents and for students, and something that our community and our businesses and our university system can rely on to be what it's actually saying that it is.
I think when I look at the title of this report, it's called The Right Trajectory. And I love that word trajectory because it means it's the right path. It doesn't mean we've gotten there yet. And I think we've heard in this room today a lot of concerns about assessments in general, and tied with teacher evaluation, and tied with how much time are kids asked to sit and take these tests. The opt-out movement, it's not a perfect system. And so this is on the right path to, are we getting good assessments in our teachers' hands and for our students to take? But we're not there yet in how we use these assessments. And I think we need to keep that in mind.
Catherine?
People sometimes ask me why I work in education. People sometimes ask me why I work in education. I'm a woman with quantitative skills. I could do other things and make more money and do. So sometimes I get asked that question. I work in education because I believe it underpins everything we do. And I work on studies like this because I believe it makes things better. And I believe this one is one more piece of making education better, making teaching better, making assessment better, so we know what we're doing and we can improve things. And I am really proud and happy we've had a chance to work on it. Thank you.
Thank you. So to close us out, I have a few more thank yous. I'd like to thank our communications partner, DCI. I would like to thank the NNSTOY staff. This has been a small study but a huge project with lots of moving parts, and they've managed it skillfully. I'd like to thank NNSTOY's board of directors. Josh is on our board of directors, and somewhere in this room is Maddie Fennell, our Nebraska 2007 State Teacher of the Year. There she is, who also serves on our board of directors. I would like to thank you for coming today. The fact that you're sitting here, that you gave up part of your workday to be here today, means a great deal to all of us who did this work. And I would like to echo Angie's thoughts. Sometimes I think when you do a study, the hardest part of the study is the name. So you do the study, what on earth are you going to call it that would convey what is most important about the findings? And I think that we hit exactly the right title. This report is telling us that we are on the right pathway. These assessments are right for our students, for our teachers, for our educational systems. And I'm very grateful to everyone who participated in this work, trusting a group of teachers to take the lead in conducting this study. My mother taught me something else as well, in addition to saying thank you. She taught me that if you invite people to come to your home, and today this is our temporary home, you feed them. And so we have lunch for you. Sean, where is the lunch? Oh, I didn't even see it. And it's right over here. So please help yourselves, and during that time, mingle and talk with teachers and ask the questions that you didn't have the opportunity to ask. Thank you so much.